I'm Greg Wheatley, and my guest today on Inside Wheaton is Michelle Knight. Michelle is a Ph.D. student in Old Testament here at Wheaton College's Graduate School. Michelle, it's great to welcome you.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
And first time you and I are meeting, but
Yes.
It's wonderful to have you here and talk a bit about your Wheaton experience. Did you go to Wheaton here before your Ph.D., or is this the first time you've been to Wheaton?
It is the first time I've been here. And so I went for my undergrad at Lincoln Christian University, and then I was at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School for my MDiv.
Tell me why Wheaton. I mean, what went into your choice? You must have looked at other places when it came time to do a doctorate. Why Wheaton?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of factors, as you alluded to. When I decided I wanted to get a PhD, of course, my first instinct was to figure out what I wanted to write about. And as soon as I realized I wanted to write in the book of Judges, I made a short list of the people with whom I'd love to work. And Dr. Block was on that list. Yes. And so Wheaton came on my radar at that point. And so then when I started to compare the different programs, I really fell in love with Wheaton's PhD program. It's a really great mix of, they call it a mid-Atlantic model, I believe. And it's a great mix of...
You're going to have to explain that one.
Oh, yeah, I'm on my way. Of a kind of European style, where you start your dissertation from day one. You start work on that. But at the same time, you get coursework, which you don't always get in a European program. Mm-hmm. That's a more American model. Right. And so by mid-Atlantic, we mean that we're bridging those two models. And so it was fun for someone like me who was ready to work on the dissertation. I got to jump right in. But I had the benefit of coursework along the way, which is just something that I really enjoy. And so it was a great program. There's a huge emphasis here on integration. As we've heard, not only in faith and learning, but in the PhD program, integration among different disciplines. And so that's something I'm super excited about. I love that I'm sitting alongside people studying historical theology and systematic theology. So they're challenging me to make sure that I'm reading the Bible really carefully and keeping in mind the way the church has always read it, keeping in mind how my systems work together. It's been such a great experience.
We were talking as we were getting set up in here with one of our colleagues here about Old Testament and how we were joking a little bit about it being the unknown Testament. Unfortunately, for a lot of Christians, that's true. Yeah. We tend to camp out in the New Testament, and we think of the Old as sort of dusty, and what is it really trying to say anyway? If we're honest, a lot of us feel that way.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you've chosen the book of Judges. I mean, my goodness. So seriously, Michelle, talk about that. Talk about how we as Christians read the Old Testament. And I mean, since Judges is your book, that's a great example. How do you read Judges from a Christian perspective?
Yeah. Well, Judges is part of our history as the people of God. The Old Testament in general tells us about how God's been working with his people from day one. And as part of that great tradition, it's incredibly important for us to understand not only where the people have been, but the way that God has been revealing himself to the people along the way. And so as I read the Old Testament, I get really excited to watch the way God has worked in really concrete situations. When we camp out in the New Testament, we get so much instruction. We get a little bit of story. We get some wonderful stories in the Gospels. But we get a lot of instruction about daily life. The neat thing about the Old Testament is you get to see the way that God's instruction plays out in everyday life. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the instruction sounds a little bit foreign, which is part of why that Old Testament feels dusty to us. It's thousands of years earlier. But it's the same sort of principles. It's the same God talking in very similar ways, just using different words.
Yeah. The other thing that occurs to me, Michelle, is that when you come to the New Testament and you read especially the Gospels, Jesus appears. All of these people who see him are thinking in terms of the Old Testament, right?
So true.
I mean, that's the world they've been in.
Yes.
It doesn't suddenly change overnight and they're in the New Testament. Right?
And our New Testament writers are using Old Testament stories and Old Testament examples and Old Testament verses often to explain the ministry of Christ. It's pivotal.
Tell me about the word judges, because it doesn't mean what our word judges means now, does
That's
it?
correct.
When you hear judges, you think of the long black robes.
That's true.
Not what it meant, right?
No, governor might be a better way to talk about it. It's some sort of an official over a group of people. Often we call them tribal leaders, perhaps, but that feels a little funny to our ears too. But it's somebody who was put in charge to govern a group of people, ideally following God's way, in the way that later kings will sort of function. But in the book of Judges, we don't call them kings, because kings is a word that we tend to associate with Canaanites in the book of Judges.
And there are judges and there are judges, right? And so what we get, right, is this whole series of Good one, not so good?
Yes.
Really lots of bad ones, if we're honest.
Lots of bad ones, yeah. It turns out that even the good ones, sometimes you have to step back and say, man, is that really how it was supposed to go? Mm-hmm. The book of Judges is challenging because we're constantly trying to understand why God used kind of messy situations and people with a lot of issues. And luckily, he does that because that means we all get to be used by God.
Well, and maybe you've answered what I was going to say. I was going to ask, what's the application there? But maybe that's it, right?
That is. I mean, the book of Judges is a great example of how a really gracious God continues to work with a really broken people. I can't think of a more important message for us.
What are the challenges of reading? You alluded to this a minute ago, and actually, not long ago, I interviewed Dr. Sandra Richter.
Oh, wonderful.
Who talks, I think she calls it the Great Barrier, of getting beyond the cultural and language and time differences.
Yeah.
When we pick up the Old Testament, some of us casually expect to just pick it up and read it devotionally.
Yes.
There's a huge barrier there. These are not people we understand. Right?
So true.
So I don't know what you're planning to do when Wheaton springs you here with a Ph.D. Are you going to teach?
I'd love to teach.
So how would you talk to a student or an adult Bible school about getting beyond that great barrier?
Yeah. I think part of that is just going to be educating yourself a little bit about that world. It's so hard for us to picture that world, and we tend to picture our world and then hope that the stories fit into it.
We read it back, don't we?
Yeah. It's so easy to do. Yeah. We do that even today, cross-culturally. Mm-hmm. And so I think the first step is always learning a little bit about that world. We are so lucky to live when we do. We live in a century where so much has been dug up. We know so much more than we did a century ago about the ancient Near East. And so there are a lot of resources, especially for lay people, just teaching them about that. And so I hope to instill in my students a love for that world and that culture. So there's that. There's also just reading the Bible over and over. God, by the grace of his nature and through the help of the Holy Spirit, just reading those stories starts to acquaint us with that kind of life and what it looked like to live there. And so I think being immersed in that world, whether it be through literature or through archaeology, always will help us understand the stories.
And reading, I would say, one thing that's been happening with me lately is understanding what it means to read the Bible in large spans.
So true.
And as story rather than little chunks of proof texting and devotional thoughts.
Yes.
And a lot of us, I don't know about your age, but my age, a lot of us grew reading the Bible that way. Just sort of 4 verses and I'm good for the day.
Yes.
And it doesn't tend to work, does it?
No. It's funny how we'll sit down on the couch with a novel and devour 300 pages, but we can't seem to get past 4 verses when we're reading in our Bibles. And I think there's a moment, especially if you can find a version that's really natural for you to read, there's a moment when you realize you are reading something like a novel, especially in Old Testament narrative texts, where you can sit back on the couch and just read the book of Judges. You might have to stop and think about some parts as you go along and soak them in later. But man, listening to the whole story really helps give you perspective.
And as you said, letting it sort of steeping in it.
Yes.
And letting it permeate who you are.
Yeah.
You mentioned Dr. Block, Dan Block, one of your favorites. I think he'd be all right. Maybe he'd be embarrassed, but let's talk about what you like about Dan Block. I think people need to hear about some of the professors here at Wheaton.
What isn't there to like about Dr. Block? He is such a dear man. I have never had an encounter with Dr. Block that wasn't really encouraging and exciting. He loves to instill in students excitement about the text, about the Bible, and about what God is going to use it to do in this world. And so that is contagious. It's difficult to be around him without being excited about your work. But what I loved about Dr. Block before I came here was his scholarly rigor. His commentary on Judges is still well known and well respected by evangelicals and non-evangelicals. It's a great commentary. He does great work. So there's that. He also has a great big picture perspective. He cares about us recognizing the way that the Old Testament and the New Testament are consistent in a lot of things. And so I get really excited about that. He helps us read the Old Testament, like you said earlier, as Christian scripture. And so that passion is right on for what I'm trying to do. And he also does a great job of carefully reading the Hebrew text. I love the Hebrew text. It's so fun. And he does a great job of being really faithful to it as he works in it.
I can tell you're a Ph.D. student. Not many people would say Hebrew is fun. So I actually was going to ask you about language study. pretty good at Hebrew, are you?
I love Hebrew. I taught Hebrew a little bit when I was working in my MDiv, and watching students learn Hebrew has been the joy of my life. And so I highly recommend language study to pretty much everybody, just try it. I love Hebrew. It's fun. I would argue it's easier than Greek. I just want to tell the world that. If you want to try a language, don't be scared by Hebrew. It's weird looking on a page, and I think that scares us a little bit.
And you have to read backwards. Right?
You got to read backwards, yeah.
Yeah.
But once you can get over how funny it looks, the syntax or like the way the sentence is set up is very easy.
Tell me what you like to do, Michelle, when you're not buried in the library, which I suspect takes up a lot of your life. But,
it does.
What else do you like to do?
Well, my husband and I serve on the musical worship team at church, and we really enjoy that. I sing. My husband plays guitar. So music is a big part of our out-of-school life. He's not in school, but when he's not at his job. So we do that. We love being outside. We have a great porch, and we spend a lot of evenings sitting playing gin rummy on the porch.
I thought you were going to study Hebrew on the porch.
Well, I do that during the day sometimes. Luckily, Hebrew can be studied anywhere. We enjoy movies. That's really fun for us. So we also have some great friends here in Wheaton, and recently especially we've been spending a lot of time with good friends.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about, what do you think you have, 2 more years, maybe 3?
Probably 2.5 from right now. So I've been in the program a year, and on my timeline that I've allotted for myself, I should be done in 3.5 years total. So. And
then your goal would be some kind of university teaching,
yes.
College?
Yeah, I think I would like to teach in an undergraduate institution. And I love the moment when people who haven't really spent much time in the Old Testament kind of dig into it for the first time. Mm-hmm. And so a college level is a great time to do that. There's a lot of intro to Old Testament courses when you're teaching people about the literature. And man, I just love watching the lights go on.
Yeah, the aha experience.
Yeah, and so that would be a fun age group for me, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's great to get to know you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And God continue to bless you as you study here and work
here.
You. Thank you so much for spending time with us. And by the way, let me say, if you're interested in finding out more about graduate studies at Wheaton College, particularly in Bible, theology, visit wheaton.edu, where you can get all of that information. Michelle Knight is a Ph.D. student in Old Testament here at Wheaton. For Inside Wheaton, I'm Greg Wheatley.